I want to put some corrections to the record here. First, I want to remind the ranking member that utilized the term that it's rarely used and shamefully a political stunt when talking about contempt. But I wonder if that was a rarely used and shameful political stunt whenever they were willing to hold in contempt Dan Scavino, Steve Bannon, Mark Meadows, Peter Navarro, and the list goes on and on. So it's not as rarely used as they may say. And I want to also say, where's the rush, as some of my colleagues have said? The rush is that on August 26th of 2021, 13 brave heroes lost their lives, and 13 Gold Star families are still living with those consequences that was political optics over military strategy and advisory by the generals, and even by Secretary Blinken's own officials. 23 diplomats in the dissent cable that we had to subpoena and nearly hold him in contempt for redacting all of the information warned the secretary that if he goes forward with this strategy, that Americans will be left behind, allies will be left behind, and Americans will lose their lives. The same way that as myself, I'm a member of the Armed Services Committee, reviewed the daily intel briefings the Secretary of Defense got that gave a continual path from the individual movement of provinces to the planning, all the way down to the date where on August 25th, the intel report stated clearly all plans have been made and execution is imminent. That imminence was the following day on August 26th. And I will tell you that if the Gold Star mother of Staff Sergeant Ryan Canas, a fellow paratrooper out of the 82nd Airborne Division, can make her time to be here in the back of this room today, then it is shameful that one of the people responsible for this botched withdrawal can't make the time throughout the entire month of September. But what does Secretary Blinken have time for? Well, we've seen him make time to play guitar and sing karaoke in downtown bars of Kiev. We heard my colleague Brian Mast talk about all the vacationing in the Hamptons. But who's been held accountable, who's lost their command, been demoted, lost their jobs? The answer is no one. And the key of why we wanted to have this hearing and that the chairman had asked for any day in the month of September is because we had finally finished the documentation that shows in the report of the negligence that occurred. We keep hearing about the Doha agreement, an agreement that President Trump and Secretary of State had put together, which was a conditions-based agreement. But what they don't want to mention on the other side is that when the generals had gone to the president and said that we should not have a full withdrawal of troops, that he had agreed to this policy. Now, you'll hear the Biden-Harris administration say that they couldn't do anything about it. The agreement had been struck. Well, wasn't the agreement struck on the Remain in Mexico policy to secure our borders? Wasn't the agreement struck on the listing of Houthi rebels as a terrorist designation that they delisted? Wasn't the policy struck to ensure sanctions against Iran when it came to their oil exportation to China, which is now funding incidents like what took place on October 7th in Israel? Let me be clear. We should commend the brave men and women who've been willing to not only wear that uniform in our armed services, but our diplomats, our agents, and our allies who fought alongside us for 20 plus years in America's longest war. I want you to all know that you should hold your head up proudly, and that it was the suits of DC, not the boots of Afghanistan, who resulted in these failures. I also want to acknowledge Congressman Mast's sacrifice, but also the sacrifice of so many heroes. And I want to recognize one of my colleagues, my fellow Floridian, Miss Anna Paulina Luna's husband, Andy, who is a proud Purple Heart Bronze Star recipient for the war in Afghanistan. I will agree with my colleagues that this is about the last 20 plus years, that we shouldn't involve ourselves in these endless wars that have no clear objective to finish, and where we think that it is our job to bring diplomacy to a nation which is troubled. I think that we should learn from the mistakes made here. And as someone who is the only member in this body and institution who went abroad to conduct the first successful rescue of Americans, a mother and 3 children left behind in Afghanistan, I am yet to have the time to ask Anthony Blinken any questions, because the times that he showed up here, he has a hard stop time and doesn't allow this committee to even ask all the questions that are necessary. So I support this contempt. And in the event that we find that this is not possible, then we should be looking at inherent contempt of Anthony Blinken. It is for that purpose that I ask all my colleagues to please vote in support of this, and let's get accountability once and for all for D.C. and for the American people. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.